Hi. Um, on this video, I want to talk about Heidegger's concept of Dasein with, or Mitsein, being with, as an existential, that is, as like a fundamental ontological feature of each of us. Um, his target, right, the view that he opposes, which finds itself to be present in especially the history of epistemology, is the idea that somehow we have access to ourselves in some kind of privileged fashion, um, but that other people are a mystery that must somehow be grasped through some kind of argument from analogy or some kind of intellectual process. Um, um, and just as Heidegger thinks that the world needs to be understood as inextricably connected with Dasein, as an existential, as a genuine predicate that is essential to us, so too being with others is. Um, think about 2 and 3 year olds playing on the playground, right? Not doing any philosophy, not engaging in any kind of theoretical thoughts about anything. Automatically, right? Recognize the other as another, as being with someone. Um, think about how your experience is different in in cases where you are with somebody as opposed to by yourself. Um, for example, I really enjoyed um, watching Mythbusters with my younger son um, several years back. Um, wouldn't really be so interested in it if I was watching it myself. Um, Sometimes, if you're watching a movie with a group of people, you'll find that um, that group of people that experience is just quite different just because you're around that group. And again, this is not something that you're theoretically thinking about. Well, you could be, but it's unlikely, right? But it's rather something that is just present in the context of the world as you find it. Um, and this connects up with the discussion of the worldhood of the world and the ready to hand. Because, of course, well, sometimes somebody is working by themselves or engaged in a project by themselves. A lot of times, what one is doing is producing something for another or working with others to try to get something accomplished. And again, the being with is present as given. It's already there. It's not something you have to reach out and find through some kind of intellectual machinations. And personally, I mean, this has just recently really struck me how foundational um, being with others is, and how basic it is, really, um, for understanding our lives. Now, of course, you say, well, sometimes people are alone. You can only be alone. You can only feel lonely if being with others is part of your characteristic. Being alone doesn't really apply to a rock, right? Or an oak tree, assuming oak trees aren't social. No, um, it only applies to beings which have being with as part of their essential constitution. Okay. Now, given that this is the way things are and that we are essentially social in this way, um, and that it is part of our constitution that we are with others, even like now, I'm alone in my house, but it's part of me that being with others. If somebody walks into the house, I will automatically recognize them as a person, right? And their otherhood would be there. If I was raised in an island, um, I would gather that when a person comes up to meet me, I would most likely recognize them as another without trying to think, oh, wonder whether or not this thing's thinking or not. I mean, there are different kinds of cases you can think about. What if it's an alien creature? a computer, but in the ordinary case, um, being with others is as foundational as the worldhood of the world. So that's all fine and dandy. And then there are some people who go on and talk about Heidegger's insistence on social norms as kind of determining is too strong, but as leading us towards certain behaviors in our inauthentic mode of life, which is the way we are in our average everydayness. Um, Heidegger thinks that the who of me or you, the who of Dasein, isn't an individual subject, not even an individual subject like Dasein would be if design is explicitly grasping onto possibilities and making them their own and creating their Daseinhood, the kind of Dasein that they will be. That kind of authentic being is possible. We'll get to that further on into the book. But ordinarily, Heidegger thinks that we are just sort of going along, going with the flow, conforming. We are acting as one does. So the section is called Das Man, right? And in German, man is used the way one is when one says something like, "How does one tip in Switzerland?" Oh, does one, deduct mileage on their taxes? In English, it doesn't happen that often, right? In German, it's much more common. And the idea is that the being of me in my everydayness, the way my self understanding really, is not an understanding of myself as an individual, but myself as one, as a kind of undifferentiated being, going with the flow, following patterns of social behavior that the public, that the masses, if you will, have implicitly prescribed for me. And then you might think, well, hey, I'm not a conformist. I'm not part of this capitalist machine. I am a radical. I'm an individualist. I'm a revolutionary. I'm an alternative dude. Well, of course, being an alternative dude also has certain standards and ways. There are ways of being an alternative dude, ways of being a rebel, just as there are ways of being to be part of the bourgeois conventionality. Um, and I guess what I was trying to get at before, some people, I'm thinking of Hubert Dreyfus, and I'm reaching back in memory because I read Dreyfus's book when I was in graduate school, taking a seminar on Heidegger. But Hubert, seem to think that this Das Man, the fact that we act on the basis of these social norms without really thinking about them or accepting them or rejecting them, is actually kind of normal and cool, and it's great. He's Heidegger just being all recognizing the that social reality is important to our lives or something like that. But if you look at the terminology that Heidegger uses, when he talks about Das Man, he says it's a dictatorship, that it is a kind of oppression, that it levels us out so that we follow a kind of fairly boring, undifferentiated mode of being without really recognizing our true potentiality, our true possibilities. Um, on the other hand, Dreyfus was certainly right that when it comes to certain things, like, how much should one tip at a restaurant in New York City? absolutely nothing wrong with having those kinds of norms, um, you know, be determinative of our lives. This is part of what lets society flow and lets us all get along with each other to a greater or lesser extent. But Heidegger means more by that when he talks about Dasein. He means a kind of leveling, a kind of undifferentiated kind of being where we really are not our own most. So the word authentic is eigentlich. Eigen means own. And so if you're not eigentlich, inauthentic, that means you're not really yourself. You have you have allowed yourself to be dominated by mass conformity. Um, and we can I, I'm not sure. I'm sure Heidegger has a point here. I'm not sure whether or not his point is as strong as he makes it out to be. Um, but we are familiar. I mean, think about patriarchy. Um, think about the practice. I mean, we were living in a time of flux and progressive change and everything, but it wasn't that long ago, within my lifetime, I think, even when I was a kid, where when thinks of a doctor or thinks of a lawyer or thinks of a politician, it's always the man that's being thought of, right? Or if you're thinking of a nurse, a woman would be thought of in that context too. Kindergarten teacher, think of a think of a woman. College professor, think of a man, right? Now it's not like people are making these decisions thinking, well, I think politicians ought to be men. I mean, sometimes that people do that, but more often than not, these are semi-conscious practices which we just absorb from our culture, and we do it, and we do it because that's how one does. Um, I think probably sexual harassment practices in the workplace. Um, Not so much now, but like think at Mad Men, thinking Mad Men, 1960s, 1950s. Um, for men, those practices were engaged in because it was what one does. It was a socially conditioned behavior. And of course, similar claims can be made about racism, and similar claims can be made about capitalism and valuing material wealth, are thinking of success as involving, a suburban house with a picket fence and a dog and two kids and a partner. Not that that's necessarily an inauthentic life. It might be fine, but um, Heidegger is very much concerned with the way in which our individuality is not actually present to its fullest in its fullest extent in our average everyday life, and it's not something you can like do away with by fiat. Um, we're all inauthentic most of the time. We can occasionally be authentic, as we'll see. Turns out that's kind of hard on Heidegger's view. But nevertheless, even somebody who has had moments of genuine authenticity, to say that their life is authentic, to say that they somehow separated themselves from Das Man completely, I think that would be a misinterpretation of Heidegger's view. Okay, so that's my video on Das Man. Please share and comment and tell me where I'm going wrong and criticize and all of that kind of cool stuff. And moods, state of mind next time. Befindlichkeit, how you find yourself. Okay, bye.